Hello, everybody. Greetings from the campus of the University of Notre Dame. My name is Father Kevin Samberg. I'm a Holy Cross priest on the faculty here as an assistant teaching professor. And maybe more to the point today is I am the Director of Spiritual and Curricular Enrichment at the Inspired Leadership Initiative, or what we call ILI. The Inspired Leadership Initiative is a program for those who have completed their chosen career and want to return to campus to discover, discern, and design who they want to be in the next stage of their lives. So thank you for participating in this session today, and thank you to those who have made this possible through their tremendous talent and dedication on this ThinkND platform in the Alumni Association, and special thanks to our other co-sponsors, the Young ND at the Alumni Association, Notre Dame Senior Alumni, Notre Dame Women Connect, and the Mendoza College of Business. Now, just a couple of technical items before we begin with our guest. You are all muted by the host to facilitate a smooth program without any background noise. Later in the program, we will have question and answer session. This will be facilitated by you submitting questions for our panelists through the Google form, which is being shared with you now. Later, we will select some questions from the group and ask our panelists to respond. Also, we recommend that you use Speaker View in Zoom, as that will highlight our speakers as our speaker as she comes on screen. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Margaret Higgins, a friend for just under a year, but a friend, or a little over a year, but a friend for a lifetime now. Margaret comes to us from California, where she is today the Director of Mission Integration at the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education at Santa Clara University, of which I am an alum. Well, I don't have to prove that to you, but it's up on the background there somewhere. Margaret, in that inaugural position, has a post that she has described as a vocational surprise, and we're going to explore a little bit about that today as we explore in the beginning of our series, Creating Your Inspired Journey, what it means to search for an inspiring life and how to measure what matters most. Margaret's career has spanned 3 decades of C-suite and senior leadership in Catholic secondary and higher education, with over 15 years in Jesuit education. I myself have 2 Jesuit degrees and have a lot of kindred spirit with Margaret. She has served in executive positions in student affairs, administration, and development, including as president, CEO of Cristo Rey San Jose Jesuit High School. And in each role, Margaret has worked with members of the educational community and external shareholders to ensure that mission, student success, and sustainability are all equally achieved. But speaking of achievements, I hope that she will share with us that her greatest achievement was coming here to Notre Dame, because the Inspired Leadership Initiative has enabled her to go forward, placing particular emphasis on first-generation students and their families, and more importantly, a deepened, inspired commitment to holistic development of graduates and future leaders. Margaret grew up on the East Coast and has recently returned to be with family, but has come back to California. She went to the College of St. Rose in Albany after growing up in the Hudson Valley. She has a Master's of Education in Guidance and Counseling from Springfield College, and then a PhD in Educational Administration and Policy from the Catholic University of America. But more importantly, she has a certificate that says she was here at Notre Dame. She is what we would then call more than a subway alumni. She is willing to get on a flight and come here at a moment's notice. However, the weather is what would have precluded her this time because we had a lot of snow. So Margaret, I want to begin by sharing with you that I have a little surprise for you. I have made for you a little snow creature. And I want you to know that this little snowman is cheering for both Notre Dame and for Ukraine, as much as we've put our efforts behind there. So I'll place my little creature on the shelf here. We'll see if he melts away. while we're in our conversation.
I love that, Father Kevin. Thank you. And thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Margaret, it's really important for us to give people a sense of what does it mean to be in the ILI, but I want to ask you a question that might seem out of the blue. Have you ever wished upon a falling star?
Father Kevin, I love that question. And I'm going to just to give you the first thing that comes to mind. I don't think which matches that lovely introduction you just did of me, or nor my experience in the ILI, but I have never wished upon a falling star, but it brings me back to a memory, which those of us who are old enough to remember Sunday nights and watching Walt Disney on TV with our families, when you wish upon a star, makes no matter where you are, when you wish upon a star, your dreams come true. And at that point in my life, Father Kevin, what I really wished for was the Barbie dream house. That's what I really wanted. And I wanted the Barbie dream house for Christmas. So I hope those of us who are online or those of us who will join us later when this is recorded will stick with us, because they probably say to themselves, you know, Father Kevin, you probably could have gotten somebody with a little bit more chutzpah than a woman who wanted to be a plastic person in a big house. But over the next half an hour, and with our wonderful colleagues joining us here on the call, I hope we'll go higher than that in inspiration.
We will, Margaret, and that's a powerful metaphor in which to begin. A plastic person in a big house. That is some people's aspiration, but it lacks inspiration. So we'll perhaps talk about the difference there. You know, what struck me was just this notion that the idea that new life is breathed into us as a result of your experience in ILI or ours as we regularly work with young adults in an educational setting. This notion of wishing upon a falling star, you know, goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They had this sense that the heavens would open up as the gods would peer in, and they had an opportunity to send up their wishes through those openings. Well, we're not worried about the Greek gods peering down upon us. We are open to a galaxy of possibility. And as there's been all sorts of exploration of space from an asteroid to Mars that might be on our minds, that metaphor of the heavens opening up and feeling inspired really struck me. As an educator, I'm particularly interested to learn what makes you inspiring in front of your faculty and students, and to learn what you make of inspiration, especially given your work in Jesuit educational settings.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about that, but let's go from the Greeks and the asteroids and tell me, Father Kevin, what has inspired you recently, particularly as we move from the pandemic or during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hope it's on everybody's minds, because in fact, I think the pandemic was a bit of a Sabbath of silence and solitude where we could be reflective. And it's only in that silence and solitude that we typically are open to receiving that inspiration. Certainly things come out of the blue, but in this case, what really was inspiring for me were the swans on St. Mary's Lake. And we have had a family of swans living there for the 8 years I've been on campus. And what I found after the campus emptied of students when they left and went home at spring break, well, in fact, they didn't even come back from spring break, was I would walk the campus and the lakes especially, and the swans had built a nest and laid their eggs, and then they had 6 cygnets. And 4 of them survived into adulthood. And when the students came back in the fall, I realized that the swans had taken their place, that those cygnets growing up had been in the place of the students that I was missing. So I found really inspiration in nature. I find it in my students. Recently, I've been listening to a lot of Arthur Rubinstein piano concertos, and I've found some people's comments about those inspiring. And then I was this summer at the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Cezanne exhibit that they had was very inspiring, because I learned how inspiring he was of other artists. So I suppose nature and music and art have been my muse. I try and bring that to students to a degree, but otherwise students themselves, and as we maybe stereotypically say, their hope and their optimism has been very inspiring for me. But isn't that the same thing that's happening when, for instance, we have young people going into senior facilities, senior living situations, to make sure that people realize like inspiration for life comes from youth?
Mhm. Yeah, very much
Well,
so.
what do you know, I asked this general question of what do you make of inspiration, especially given your educational setting?
Mm.
But in the past, you've told me that at your stage in life with ILI and moving on from a solid career, you experienced greater inspiration and less motivation. Would you say more about that?
Yeah, yeah. I would say when I was building my career, it was all about motivation, right? So it was about getting to the next leadership position. It was about the outcome. And that was not forgetting how critically important students and their whole integral development was, looking at them holistically and the sanctity of the individual. All that was important, but it wasn't, it was motivating me. When I look at who I am now and what I'm doing now, it's what inspires me. And so the work that I am incredibly lucky enough to do and never would have thought I was doing before I would be doing before I came to the ILI is working with the faculty and staff at Santa Clara and helping them to make the Jesuit Catholic mission their own. So it is an incredible opportunity that I have to work with the future leaders. It's relational, it's holistic, it's personal, it's just very different. So my inspiration now comes from not a motivation to build my LinkedIn profile or to go higher in my career, but to engage people and to go wider and deeper into Jesuit education. And for that, I feel very blessed and never thought I would be doing something like this.
That difference between inspiration and motivation makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, it squares up nicely with the way I tend to describe the charism of a Holy Cross education, which is to kindle the heart, illumine the mind, and guide the journey or inspire the journey. Because in fact, inspiration, it strikes me, is this notion of breathing life into someone. That's what it means. It says the spirit is breath, the in or in or en is to put into, so putting breath into. So in my little notion of a Holy Cross charism, it's to kindle the heart or to encourage, to put courage in, to put the heart in. It is to illumine or enlighten, put light in, and it is to inspire, put breath in. That it is to fill people with the breath, the fuel to go the long journey. So if you'd say something about your journey and how it brought you to the moment of ILI, and then how ILI may have had some inspiration for the next steps in it.
Yeah, thanks, Father Kevin. It's great to reflect back. So my last position was I was president of a Cristo Rey High School here in San Jose. And I'm sure many on the call will be familiar with the model, but it's a national model. I was at a Jesuit high school. And what happens is we work with students, parents and students in neighborhoods where they have not had access to a high quality education. And it's an academically rigorous high school program with a corporate work study experience. So that was a remarkable point in my life, those 3 years, to be able to work for and with these incredible students. As that position came to an end, I thought to myself, what is next? And didn't know whether I would continue working or what would continue to, as you say, breathe life into me. And I thought, I'll apply for the ILI at Notre Dame. I was deeply drawn to the fact that it's Our Lady's University and that there would be a spiritual component. In August, found myself 2,000 miles from home, was lucky enough that Tony, my husband, came with, living on North Eddy Street in jeans with a backpack on, which was very different than I had lived the last 20 years of my career. but found many of the same things at Notre Dame that I had found in my career. But the beauty of it is it was like a sabbatical Father Kevin I had never had, right? I was on a gorgeous campus with incredible students, faculty, and resources, all again pointed towards what the Jesuits would say is the greater glory of God, finding God in all things. And at Notre Dame, the strong push for the common good. And able to just be in an incredible 9-month incubator with a cohort of 22 of us now who, people say, talk about measuring an inspired life. People say that you're lucky if you have 5 people on your favorites list that you could call. After 9 months in the ILI, I have 30 members of my cohort, many of whom who are on the line, and their spouses and their partners. So again, that's the way now I think about an inspired life rather than a life where I was motivated. And when we're motivated, as I'm sure many on the line have been or still are, we're still about doing the good. But when you're inspired, it's coming from within, and it's coming from God. And that's the beauty of what I got in the 9 months in the ILI program.
I love that. In fact, what you've described is that maybe typically we have a concentric circle of relationships, and we could call them different things. Family would be our biological origins, and culturally we would inherit a lot from that. But we would branch out to friends and society. But at one point it starts to become anonymous to us as it gets further out. And in fact, one of my concerns is that our students are coming in increasingly wired for a transactional and virtual reality as opposed to a social reality when you bring up the question of the common good. Have you, especially now being back in Silicon Valley, have you reflected on any sense of what that virtual and transactional experience does to, I'm going to say, deaden us, and how this network that you've described, and maybe it's something more than a network, right? You've actually been able to receive inspiration from.
Oh, yeah. And the network I brought back with me from Notre Dame is so much more than a network. It's like BFFs for life. I mean, it is just absolutely incredible because the depth of what we experienced together, and we brought our authentic selves. So none of us sat in there as the CEO or the president or the judge. We sat in there as human persons who really were searching together on a journey. And what I find with my current work, and again, I'm sure it'll be interesting once people start to ask us questions, but is I have found a lot of loneliness, Father Kevin. And even I wonder sometimes with the students at Notre Dame or the students at Santa Clara, and even our faculty and staff colleagues, that coming out of the pandemic, where we were forced not to gather together, where we were not in community, there's a sense of loneliness and a strong desire for human connection. And when you couple that with what is going on with mental health issues, and I am so proud of the college age generation because they brought all this to the forefront, and no longer is there a stigma around asking for support and asking for help, be it counseling or be it pastoral. That was not so for my generation. You were supposed to figure all this stuff out on yourselves. But I think those two things, again, to be at this stage of my life and to be able to be present to people authentically as they are, authentically as I am, and support and love them, it's amazing.
Yeah, you brought up the most powerful word, and I think it is the deepest illness, not symptom, of our society and this generation in college right now, and that is loneliness.
Yeah.
In fact, with our undergraduate class, I co-teach the Heart's Desire and Social Change with Father Dan Grudy. Historically, and this year was no different, when the students map their fears out on a big whiteboard, the number one fear that they list is loneliness. And here they are amongst 8,000 undergraduates, many of whom form very tight relationships from the very beginning, and they can still articulate that they're afraid of being lonely. one of the anecdotes that we actually put out there for them about that is solitude and silence. Solitude isn't necessarily even being alone, but aloneness isn't loneliness. Solitude is actually being deeply connected in yourself so that you can hear yourself outside of the din of, and this is a pretty quiet campus, even of campus life. So what kind of practices did you experience that helped you recognize that loneliness operative in the world and counteract it?
Well, I think, Father Kevin, when you go from being the person in charge, again, as I said, in jeans, in a backpack, walking to audit a class, with the freedom of no responsibilities on a stunningly gorgeous and rich university campus, it can be a bit lonely, right? Because everything has changed. What I found, however, is it helped me to go deeper into who I am and into who actually students are, because there is nothing like auditing a class. And I took classes I took the Theologians of Grace. I have colleagues who took metalworking, who took art, who took dance. I took creative nonfiction writing, but being in the classroom with these incredible human persons and not having any responsibility except for to do the work myself was absolutely incredible and freeing. Also, what I had through the ILI program was I had times I didn't need to schedule where I was actually able to reflect. I remember I came to you and we talked about praying, and you suggested that I just sit on benches and pray. And I did for a while. And I thought, okay, I look like a little bit of a crazy woman, whatever. But I sat and I thought about the people who had donated those benches, and I thought about the surroundings. And so I would say prayer has played a big part. While I was at Notre Dame too, I was able to do the spiritual exercises. And again, people come to Notre Dame with all different types of life experiences from different religions, none at all. My background is Catholic, and my love and my vocation has always been Jesuit education. So I came a little bit different. So I would say those are some of the practices, and just getting really comfortable with what I believe to be my vocation moving forward, which is really to support and to promote other people's leadership, to take all the gifts and the blessings I have been given throughout my career and help and support and love and promote other people's leadership.
Well, you've said something really powerful there, and I want to go in a maybe slightly different direction with it. But I want to first emphasize the value that I see in selecting a particular place and time to give yourself even moments of Sabbath over the course of a day, because we can create the conditions for inspiration to happen, whether it's out of the Milky Way or in your particular bench. I have one on campus as well. Mm-hmm. So don't underestimate the continuation of that. And in fact, I was on a retreat at Los Altos, and my Jesuit retreat director sent me to Santa Clara's campus to sit with the mission church. And I took a picture of a rose that is still the cover photo on my phone to this day. So inspiration can come when we create the conditions for it. But you said that you are in a role of supporting people in leadership. So you're actually now the vehicle of inspiration. You're breathing life into them. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily flatlined, but nonetheless, so what I want to call you is a deuteragonist. Do you know what a deuteragonist is?
That's a big $5 word, Father Kevin. So tell me what it means.
I'm known for those, and I'd like to charge more than $5 for that. A deuteragonist is the second actor in a story. Mm-hmm. You probably remember that any good story requires a plot that is a tension to make a story. The story is composed of its resolution after its struggle. So you lay out a story's framework, an exposition of the story, and then you have a struggle between a protagonist and an antagonist. Mm-hmm. Now, the agonist in this is the Greek word for contest. And so the protagonist is the main character. The antagonist is the one with whom they're struggling, or that which against which they have to struggle and what they have to overcome. And that rising action in a story is that struggle between the protagonist and the antagonist. And hopefully they get to a point of freedom so that they've defeated the antagonist. The deuteragonist is the second actor. Deuter means second in the Greek, that helps the protagonist, and in fact keeps the protagonist in the action, because all throughout life, he is our own protagonist. We want to get out of the action. We want to give up the fight in lots of different ways. And so you can see classic examples of this throughout literature, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Enkidu was Gilgamesh's friend and his deuteragonist, to Mark Twain's The Adventures, Huckleberry Finn, where Huck has run away from home and he encounters a runaway slave, Jim, who becomes his surrogate father. Jim is his deuteragonist. Or in contemporary literature for young adults, especially, really important here, where in The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, Peeta is the deuteragonist to Katniss, the protagonist. And he's really important there because his name means bread, like pita bread, and he's the one who feeds her. That's what a deuteragonist does. The deuteragonist feeds the drive for the protagonist to finish their journey. Anyway, so you sound like a deuteragonist. Have you experienced some in life, or what does it mean to take on that role? Because that's the role of a deuteragonist, is to inspire.
Right. What it means is you let your ego get out of the way and you let inspiration come in. For me, that's exactly what it means. And what it means for me is that I can see the vision. You know, I always saw the incredible life and vitality and spirituality of students, of undergraduate students. And I always saw their potential, always. Now to be able to not only work with students, but to be able to work with faculty and staff, some of whom will have aspiration to go higher in Jesuit education, Holy Cross education, but who really want to go much more deeper into mission, right? So who want to understand and experience what it really is to work at a Jesuit Catholic university. That's my role now. And I have been so blessed, Father Kevin, with a career where other people taught me, where the experiences I had have all led me here. What I had to do, though, was separate from first career into probably what will be much more important, my second career, which feels much more, even more vocational than my first. So Deuteronomist, it is, person who promotes, person who supports, because I see in their personhood the future of Holy Cross and Jesuit and Catholic higher education. And if I can play a small role in it, so be it.
Well, it's a profound role, and you've used this word twice now, that you want to deepen somebody else's experience, and you don't need to heighten your own. And those metaphors tend to talk about different things. The heighten goes back to a big house.
Yes.
And the deepen talks about a big heart or an open life to the changes that have to come about for a better world. Mm-hmm. This is fascinating to talk about those things, but you said the most important thing perhaps is that you have to set your ego aside, so you can make the transition from the desire to heighten success, status, wealth, whatever it is, so that you can go deeper toward the heart, toward meaning, toward purpose, toward value, toward mission, toward inspiration. Yeah. Does that sound right to you?
It does. And, right? Yeah, you got it. You got it beautifully. And ego is not a bad thing. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, so ego is not a bad thing.
Me too.
You know, and it's something we need to have. But what I feel this stage of life is for me is ego is background, God, enduring, inspiration, others, love, in whichever way you call it, right? However you name the divine, that's in the front ground now. And so that's the difference. I don't know that I would be there, Father Kevin, had I not spent the 9 months at Notre Dame and the 9 months with my cohort. and the 9 months on campus with the students and the faculty. So yeah, ego's still important and I can still get right into it, believe you me. But from my perspective, what's more important for many of us, I think, who are on the call is, what do I want to inspire? Who else do I want to support, promote, and love?
Well,
And how do I do that in a way that resonates with me and my knowing of God?
I love that term resonance right there. And it's interesting to think about how we have to maybe decenter ourselves to find the right resonance for our lives. When thinking about this heighten versus deepen and how our society is, for the most part, oriented toward heighten. And I appreciate that the ego does have a role, but we talk about, and this was in your class too, about how the false self can take over the true self if the ego isn't held in check. And then a sense of self comes out of our heightening abilities, our heightening status, wealth, etc., as opposed to our deepening values. And David Brooks has written beautifully about this in terms of what he calls resume versus eulogy virtues. And how are you going to be remembered? And how do you make that shift from the egocentric resume to the eulogistic virtues that you want to be remembered for? Because in fact, when you're remembered in a eulogy, presumably you breathe some life about those values, that purpose into somebody else. But how do you think people can make this transition, whether or not they come to a program such as ILI? And I'm going to give you a really tough example to work through, right? When Rockefeller was asked how much was enough in terms of his wealth, and at that point in his life, he was worth the complete gross domestic product of the entire continent of South America, all Latin America. He was asked, how much is enough? You know what his response was? He said, a little bit more, a little more. Or I remember I used to work in banking, and before I came into Holy Cross, and at the height of the dot-com bubble, and I worked with some of these computer science engineers, so I had a picture of what this would be like for this man, because I worked at a trust bank in particular. He was a billionaire in Silicon Valley, and he said, what did I do wrong? What do you mean, what did you do wrong? He was a billionaire because overnight, people half his age were becoming triple billionaires. They were worth 3 billion, and he was still only worth 1 billion. It's like, how do you derail that guy's mentality from what that standard, that measure of life is? What have you seen amongst your ILI fellow cohort, or even experience for yourself, that allows you to say, okay, ego, you're going over here behind me?
Yeah, I think the way I'd answer Rockefeller would be nada más, no more, nada más. You don't need any more, right? And what I learned from my colleagues, my new dear friends, a couple of different things. Number one, what I suggest people attempt to do is something that is totally out of their comfort zone. So it might be taking a class, it might be becoming artistic, something you have never done, but there's always been a little something saying to you, I want to paint, I want to dance. So do something out of your comfort zone. Second thing is take time to just be. We spend a whole lifetime, Father Kevin, at least I did. I don't know if those of us joining us here today did, but you're doing a lot of doing. But in being, and there's different ways to be. For me, it's centering prayer, but it might be meditation, it might be yoga. But because when we're being, we're doing a different type of listening, and it's amazing what answers come, and it's amazing where you end up. A lot farther from the Barbie dream house than I was as a child. So I would say those two things. Oh, and third thing, and this is tougher to do. I think it would have been tougher for me to do here in Mountain View, but reach out and make new friends. Reach out and find new people to be with, because I cannot tell you how that has been life-changing for me, to have my cohort now be my family.
Well, you're talking about some new and the openness to the new. One of the things that we maybe could think about is, how do we put together a package of practices to allow the new into our lives? And how do we have a routine where the new is ordinarily there? Because I got to be honest with you, I could pull out my iPad right now and I could go onto YouTube and you won't find a lot of new. I have doom scrolled before, but my algorithm is set and they don't know how to put anything new in there. So have you thought about this? How do you put something new into your own algorithm using that metaphor out there, right? How do we put new variables in there? You say, make new friends. That's right. Just be, and to get out of your comfort zone. What's the fear do you think people are dealing with if they want the algorithm to be closed?
I think the fear comes from, and this is kind of blasphemous coming to you from Silicon Valley, believing the algorithm really works. Now, I'm not here to diss AI at all, but the algorithm doesn't really work all the time. In particular, I think for those of us who are in this stage of life, get rid of the algorithm, get out of the box and try something new. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
and it's not easy. It's not easy, but it is worth it.
You know, I'm struck, you're making me think about other categories of measurement and how we oftentimes think about success in particular ways. And here we are in Indiana. And in fact, he used to teach high school in South Bend. He taught high school English in the 1930s. And this is John Wooden. Mm-hmm. And he said that there was a difference between succeeding and winning. And maybe winning is that heightening, but succeeding is that deepening. And he said he came up with, after a lot of introspection, his own definition of what it meant to succeed. And he said, success is the peace of mind attained only through self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do the best of which you're capable. And maybe we sell ourselves short in terms of not even just our effort, but what's even best for us. I like this idea that inspiration comes from the heavens, because it suggests that there's something transcendent that says there's maybe something better and something best even for me. And I've got to make sure that my life is open to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the way I feel about it, Father Kevin, is I've always been inspired by Oscar Romero. And he talks about planting the seeds, right? Sowing the seeds, but we will never actually see the fruit of our labors. And that's what I think about as inspirational, is that we're giving of ourselves, we are in relationship, and we're planting seeds, but we're planting seeds, we're laying the bricks, we're the laborers, but we're never going to see the result.
Yes, planting seeds. In fact, that is inspiration into the earth. And that goes all the way back to the metaphor from Genesis, that God took Adama, the earth, and breathed into it life. Well, let's see what life the audience is breathing into us, so we can shift into a bit of a Q&A session right here. I want to thank Tom Darrow from the class of 87 for giving us this one hint of thinking about ego. And what ego does, he says, is edges God out. He said he first heard that from Ken Blanchard. Ego, E-G-O, edging God out, and how to avoid that. Sabbath practices are really critical, I think, to that. Mm-hmm. Here's another question. Can you describe the relationship between the fellows and the undergraduate students, since you mentioned that you audit classes? What did you see as similarities and differences between where you were on your journey and where they are on theirs?
Mm-hmm. All right. Auditing classes with undergraduates at Notre Dame was transformative for me. Now, remember, my whole career had been built with and for undergraduates, but sitting in a classroom and having Notre Dame students workshop your creative writing pieces, I tell you, I mean, I could have been delivering a speech to 600 people or sitting it and running a board meeting. It was frightening. They are absolutely amazing. They're inquisitive. They're curious. I wrote a piece in creative nonfiction on my experience during 9/11. Now, remember, most of them had not been born on 9/11, but the feedback they gave me was absolutely incredible. So I would say, number one. Number two, it gave me incredible hope for the future. Particularly, I took a class with Father Kevin Grove,
Go.
incredible theologians of grace. And I sat in that classroom, and it was a couple of undergraduates, master's and doctoral students, and also some Holy Cross, some people in the Holy Cross. I think, do you call them novitiates, Father Kevin, or
Seminarians or
seminarians?
scholastics. Yep.
So seminarians or scholastics. And what that gave me hope for was not only the future of the world, but the future of the church. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. Students were accepting. I mean, half of them, they would sit down, and my cohort members will tell you this. They thought I was the faculty member. When they realized I was auditing the class, they were incredibly curious about what I was doing, why I was doing this, who I was. So I would say it was a remarkable experience. Also, I grew to love things like football. Now, football and athletics had reported to me at smaller institutions, but because we were in the classroom with the football players and the women athletes, it took on a whole nother dimension in my understanding and love for students, and feeling pretty good about where I was in life too.
Do you have any sense of what is it like to help an undergraduate envision that the real goal is to go deeper, but they've been formed for going higher? Mm-hmm. Now, William Deresiewicz has written a book called Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite, and what we can do about it. I gave a chapter of that book called The Students to my first-year students one year. And what Deresiewicz describes there is the hoops that our students are designed to do. And they are basically programmed for success. It's like they're on a treadmill. And I've thought, oh, I'd love to get them off. And their parents say, yeah, by all means, get them off, except make sure they're successful, right? They just want me to decrease their stress levels. Because I'm really anxious that our students are already in a billable hours mindset. And by that, I mean their mind is formed by the utility of their time. And the utility of their time is measured in terms of its potential remuneration, financial. Kathy Caveney, who used to be on the law faculty here and the theology faculty, she's now at Boston College, has written about this, that as a young lawyer, even the way you spend your Thanksgiving is calculated in terms of what time am I not billing. Any number of us probably are familiar with what billable life is like, even if we haven't been under it. And I want to inspire students to live by fiction. So instead of living by billable hours, I think we need to live by fiction. And what I mean by that is that we want to live in that struggle as a protagonist and an antagonist. We want to struggle with the reality of billable hours. Sure, you may do it, but don't let it overtake you, right? And even more so, living by fiction is to cast an open-ended picture. It's like, you don't know what the end of this story is. That's the fiction part, but you get to craft it if you exercise your agency. Did you see students struggling in a way with their agency to break out of that billable hours mentality?
Yeah, Father Kevin, I think everything you just said is true. What I found was because I changed, they changed. So I went from administering, teaching, being in front of students, to being with students at Notre Dame, and now being with students at Santa Clara. And I find when you sit and you listen to students, they are remarkably rich persons, and they already have the essence or the seed in their thoughts about how they are going to help heal this broken world. So I think what we can do, this generation, all of us on the call, people listening to this, is simply sit and listen to young people, listen to what it is they want to change the world, and how can we actually support them in doing that. Now, for part of their lives, billable hours may be important, but at Notre Dame, they're being prepared to be a force for good in the world. At Santa Clara, they're being prepared to do the same in a more just, sustainable, and human world. And as long as that seed is planted and we are listening to our students, I think we're in good shape.
Well, what's fascinating about that notion of listening is that stop me because I'm being the teacher here, that in the Greek, it has its roots in the word we know as logos, the word logine. And logine means to hold together, to protect, to bind together. Listening binds together people, the speaker and the listener. That's ultimately, ideally, what dialogue is. And that's moving people toward a fuller sense of coherence, of order, of essence. And that, I think, is the deep side. And the high side is maybe the potential that this holds if it were deployed. But if we don't pay attention to the deep early, so I appreciate how we're able to do that with undergraduates, then they won't be able to bring others to height because they won't have the depth to do that. Can you speak to what if somebody doesn't do ILI? What might you imagine, having done it, that people could do? This is one of the other questions out there, to engage in this kind of a transition, whether it's from motivation to inspiration or engaging the deep as opposed to the heights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is somehow separating from prior career life. And I think each of us might do that differently, but giving yourself time to play, to rejuvenate, to be, I think some separation from that is an important first step. And then I think the second part of that is in thinking about being, who do you want to be in this world? And there's enough going on in this world that we are all interested in changing. And how do we want to continue to be a force for good? And then again, as I said, I think the last thing, Father Kevin, is branching out and finding new people that share that same kind of passion, that same kind of inspiration, that have moved from ego to inspiration to be kindred partners in the continued journey moving forward. And I might suggest that if you're on this call, that's exactly the way you're thinking, and that it's up to us to network and find each other.
Well, I'm going to give you an exercise on how to do that. And I didn't have the benefit of teaching you in the Heart's Desire portion of ILI's core course called The Human Journey. But already I have taught this cohort to do this one exercise. And here's one that people can bring to the Thanksgiving table. And you may have one already, in fact, too. And as I've talked with people about it, I've found that to be the case. And usually there's ideas rattling around, but there's a value in putting what I would call maxims for life onto a 3x5 index card and putting that in your pocket and carrying it with you for a year. First of all, it becomes a relic of inspiration because somebody wants to understand how they could eulogize you, and it's on that card. And every story on that card has, every maxim on that card has a story behind it. And that story is inspiration. It's breathing life into you. I didn't get this idea on my own. In fact, I was given a card from a friend whose father had run the world's largest Woolworth. And that was the Five and Dime, right, in Boston. It was at that time what today Amazon would be or Walmart would have been. And the very first thing he says is listen.
Mm-hmm.
The very first thing he says on there is listen. And then later on he says listen again.
Mm-hmm.
So that listening is really what deepens the relationship. And in fact, research shows that the more you listen, the more people go into the depth of their own story.
Yes.
Most people depend on a continual relationship of listening to yield the trust. And only after that trust can understanding and meaning come. And that goes for ourselves. We have to listen to ourselves. We don't necessarily trust what we hear within, or we don't want to hear what we hear within. So that's one suggestion right there as a very practical thing, is to, in fact, write down what are your rules for life? What are the maxims of life onto a 3x5 card? I have my own. It starts out by go among trees and sit still.
Mhm.
Remember your roots, and then dare to dream, and then teach. It's pretty simple. It needs to be refined, but I take it from a piece of poetry from Wendell Berry. So I want to ask you to think about, as we come toward an end here, is there something that summarizes your sense that, in fact, inspiration is different from motivation because it breathes life into us, and you've shifted into that inspiration phase of your life, and that what matters most is who matters most?
Mhm.
What would you put on a card to communicate what you've experienced in ILI, or just thinking about inspiration and measuring what matters most in life?
What matters most in life to me are the people who helped grow me up, are the people that I am currently with today, and are the people that I will be in the future with. What matters most about that to me, Father Kevin, is deepening relationships, listening to other people, approaching life with more humility. And humility means that, you still keep those achievements you had from that former life. But you're actually here. What I think I'm here to do vocationally is to give my gifts to others, right? And to listen deeply to them. So it might be, if I had to put it on a card, be curious, be in relationship with God, listen to others. Life is more than plastic people and big houses.
And how do you know when you are past the plastic person and the big house, when you are who you want to be?
I think hopefully, I may have to spend a little time. I don't know if we still have purgatory, but I may have to, spend a little time somewhere before
Yeah,
I get to the pearly gates.
fair enough.
But I am hoping when those pearly gates open to me and I'm asked to come in, that there will be my ancestors will be there, and there will be God, as we all know God, and there will be somebody who is absolutely smiling at me and saying, Margaret, I was always with you and I listened to you. Thank you for listening to me. Come in.
Well, that's going to be a great story to tell, Margaret, and I want to be there to hear it too. And I do want to counsel our listeners that this notion of living by fiction instead of living by billable hours is much more achievable, and it's much more human than we might imagine. One of my favorite authors, who's also a writer of fiction, makes the distinction between quantity versus form. His name is Wendell Berry, and he says the standard of performance tends to be set by the capacity of the technology rather than the individual nature of our places and creatures. And so as we are increasingly in a technologically oriented world, 30 years ago, we would have said, or maybe even 20 years ago, we would have said it was informational oriented, right? Right. But no, now it's really technological. That standard that's set for us by, in fact, the increasing standards of our smartphone, for instance, we actually imbibe that and we set ourselves up against it. And we have to create a completely different standard than that. This is what I mean by living by fiction, because the novel is an experiment in the idea that the universe holds together, but it's not set in stone. Mm-hmm. And that we can use it to model a reality. So the better stories we tell of ourselves, the more we're going to fulfill those stories. So I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. I want to thank the audience for coming in and opening up the potential for inspiration, as well as then the potential for them to narrate their own stories. I hope that you have found our discussion to be as insightful as I have, and Margaret to be as stimulating as she was. And it is not to oversell what you experienced, Margaret. I've seen every cohort from ILI. I've traveled with the first cohort on Ireland. I've traveled with your cohort in Santa Fe and other parts of New Mexico. And I am able to see, after having brought other people on different travels too, that bonding that comes together because, in fact, you have set the ego aside and you're wanting, not just willing, but wanting to go deep, because the height is something that you're going to help somebody else with, but it doesn't count for you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to give you one last word if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll just let people know what's up ahead.
Yeah. I would just thank everyone for being here, and I send you my love and I send you my great energy, and I can't wait to hear about your own movement into an inspirational life journey. And so thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, everybody. Just to let you know that you can find more details about ILI online at ili.nd.edu. You'll also find there that we have a virtual exploration event about ILI for the upcoming academic year, 23 through 24, tomorrow, Tuesday, November 15th at 11 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can register there online at ili.nd.edu for that virtual exploration event. We will also continue in this Think ND inspiring series with our further inspiring conversations, one of which we had just last week on kinship in leadership. And so you'll find more on our website about that in the next coming days, but you'll also find that inspiring conversation on the Think ND website. And finally, our series, this Creating Your Inspired Journey, continues on December 8th with a series called Thinking About Your Legacy. Chris Stevens, on the faculty of Mendoza College of Business, and in fact, a co-founder of ILI, will be online with 4 alumni from ILI. So to just give my final thanks, peace be with you all from Notre Dame, and what comes up this Saturday, Boston College here on campus with 29 degrees as the high for the day. So go Irish. Goodbye, everybody.